I'm David Debato, and you've just entered the No Delusion Zone. Welcome to the No Delusion Zone. I'm David Debato. My special guest today is someone who's been on the No Delusion Zone before and is back by popular demand. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges is retired from the United States Army and was formerly the commander of U.S. Army Europe. Currently, General Hodges can be seen almost every day on international news and information platforms discussing, among other topics, the war in Ukraine, NATO, Europe, the EU, and national security issues in the United States. He recently attended the 75th anniversary of NATO conference in Washington, D.C. It is my great pleasure to once again welcome to the No Delusion Zone, General Hodges. Welcome, Ben.
Dave, thank you very much for the privilege.
I know you're pressed for time, so I'm going to go through what I hope are some of the more important questions, and then I know you've got to run. If you could briefly, and I don't want to stretch it out because I do have many questions, can you summarize your thoughts on the NATO conference?
There are three things. First, of course, it was the commemoration of 75 years of the Washington Treaty, which created NATO, and that's something that's worth commemorating. The alliance has never been perfect, but it has grown from 12 to 32 nations because nations that used to be part of the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact knew that their future security depended on getting into NATO and away from Russia's reach. So the success of the alliance, based on collective defense and American leadership, that was worth commemorating. But the other two takeaways for me from this NATO summit here in Washington 2 weeks ago was what I didn't hear. What I did not hear was a clear declaration by the alliance that helping Ukraine to defeat Russia is in the best strategic interest of all of us. So I didn't hear that. There still are nations, including the United States, that are too easily deterred by Russian threats of using a tactical nuclear weapon, even though the likelihood of Russia using a nuke is almost zero. The third thing that we didn't hear was a definitive invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance. Lots of talk around the edges, steps are going to be taken, but still, Russia is still able to prevent us from allowing Ukraine to exercise its rights as a sovereign nation and for the alliance to open the door to Ukraine. So the two things I didn't hear were louder than the one thing I did hear.
Well, that's going to roll into my next questions. Where the hell are the F-16s? I know they're on their way, but they've been on their way since Jesus was a boy, and they're not quite there yet. And I understand when they do get there from the United States, they're only going to have about a dozen because of training constraints. So when are they going to be there? And I'll just follow that right up because of time. Do you believe that the U.S. and or NATO are going to allow Ukraine to finally strike targets deep within Russia to attack the actual origin of the missiles and artillery that are hammering Ukraine? And if so, when do you think that's going to happen?
So both of the policy decisions that you just outlined, F-16s and striking targets inside of Russia, are terrible policy decisions. There's no legal, moral, or operational basis for these decisions. These are entirely the manifestation of the administration's unwillingness to clearly define America's strategic objective is that Ukraine defeats Russia. And these are the outcome of our excessive fear of Russia somehow escalating. That has prevented the administration from moving decisively and doing what needs to be done. And so when you don't have a clearly defined outcome, i.e., help Ukraine defeat Russia, then you end up with bad policy, such as the incremental decision-making on delivery of F-16s, unwillingness to open up the training pipeline to get more pilots trained, or ridiculous things such as you can use the ATACMS, but not against bases from which these Russian aircraft and launchers are originating. Bad policy comes from not having a clearly defined objective. That's the biggest failure so far of the administration in this war, despite all the good things that have been done.
Do you see that policy changing in the near future, either through a potential Harris administration or through NATO?
Well, of course, other nations can do what they want. I mean, they can. The Brits have already said, the new Prime Minister Starmer already said that Ukraine could use Storm Shadow to hit any target they want. Other NATO nations have said the same thing. So it's really the United States with the ATACMS and Germany's continued unwillingness to provide Taurus. Those are the two standout systems that are being limited in where they can be, where the Ukrainians are limited in where they can employ them. Who knows? The decision by the president to step aside, to not run for re-election, he may feel that he could do some things now that he couldn't before, but I don't think his decision to limit Ukraine was driven by political considerations. I think he and Jake Sullivan and those around him really have an excessive fear of Russia escalating, and they're not willing to do anything that they think might cause that. So unfortunately, I don't see it happening over the next 6 months as long as the president remains in office. A Harris administration hopefully will take a more decisive approach to this. I don't know.
Well, I'll just say this because I've said it before and I'll say it again. I hope that when January 20th comes around, if there is a President Harris, that Jake Sullivan is unemployed. And I'll just leave it there. Do you think that if again, God forbid that Trump wins the election, do you believe that NATO can actually make up the gap between U.S. aid and what Ukraine actually needs, at least in the near term, before disaster strikes?
Actually, if you think about the combined economies and population and military capabilities of the other 31 nations of NATO, other than nuclear weapons, the rest of NATO should be able to do that. I mean, they should be able to deter Russia. They should be able to provide Ukraine everything that it needs. But do they have the political will? I mean, clearly we don't have the political will to do everything that needs to be done. Do the other nations have it? And of course, the Russians are banking on the fact that so far, all of our European allies have not done that. Although it is worth noting that the combined contributions of all the EU, the European Union, exceeds that of the United States. So, short answer, yes, they could make up a lot of that, except for certain capabilities. Ammunition production is going up in a lot of places, but what's missing is political will. And this is where the United States could still, even if we didn't provide much more, the clarity of purpose, and also, assuring nations that the United States is not going to walk away from Europe would give them more confidence that they could provide more things to Ukraine. The Europeans know that they will pay an enormous price if Ukraine fails. You'll have millions more Ukrainian refugees heading into Poland and Germany and other parts of Europe. You'll have continued disruption of food supplies and energy supplies in the region. And the Russian army will absorb thousands of Ukrainian troops that will be forced into service. And so you'll see a stronger Russian army as well. And if Ukraine fails, it will be because we allowed it to fail, and therefore Russia will feel emboldened to keep going. So there are zero positive outcomes for us and for Europe if Ukraine fails.
Well, as usual, those countries that are on the front lines, if Russia continues its aggression into Europe, I'm talking, of course, the Baltics and Poland specifically, and possibly Romania, Moldova, Georgia, they are the most relentless in asking for higher defense spending and everything else to support Ukraine. You are very familiar with Germany. You live there now. What do you think the chances are that Germany is going to find the political will to finally allow their weapons to be used deeper inside of Russia, and to find the money in the budget to ramp up their ammunition and weapons production?
Yeah. So Germany has actually provided a lot of really good capabilities already. And I'm just reading this morning that a third Patriot system has been delivered from Germany to Ukraine. The thing that stands out that they haven't provided, of course, is the Taurus, this precision weapon with a range of about 500 kilometers that could be very effective at helping Ukraine destroy Russia's ability to launch attacks against Ukrainian cities. I can't tell. The current government seems unwilling to go ahead and take that next step, even though there has been growing pressure inside the Germany and the German Bundestag, their parliament, to do this. And I think part of Chancellor Scholz's reluctance is based on the fact that he's not confident that the U.S. would be there to help protect them from Russian retribution, specifically nuclear, because unlike France and UK, Germany has no nuclear weapon. And so I think that he worries that if there is a Trump administration, that Trump would say, too bad, F you, and not guarantee a nuclear deterrent on behalf of Germany. And so I think this is where failed American leadership and German concern about a Trump administration stifles their willingness to provide Taurus.
Kremlin propaganda, of course, is just unbelievably positive about all the accomplishments that the Russian army is making and has made in Ukraine. Ben, what's your honest assessment of the current status of the Russian army generally, but specifically in Ukraine and their current offensive?
So one of Russia's accomplishments is to lose over 1,000 soldiers a day here over the last several weeks for literally no gain. I mean, incredible casualties that even Russia, at some point, that's going to have an impact. So over 1,000 a day, and I don't see any capability for them to knock Ukraine out of the war. So enormous cost of lives, equipment. I was just watching a video of a Russian train carrying tanks that have been refurbished, headed to the front. These tanks were built about the time I was born in 1958. So they've been freshly painted, some new stuff in there. But I mean, this is what we're talking about. They're pulling out everything they've got because they have lost so much, and they don't have the ability to manufacture anymore that at the levels needed because of sanctions and because so many men who used to work in factories are now dead somewhere in Ukraine. So I don't see Russia having the ability to actually do anything other than continue murdering innocent civilians by bombing cities. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is almost completely gone from Crimea, from Sevastopol. The Russian Air Force has failed its two main tasks, which are to get air superiority and interdict the supply lines that bring equipment and ammunition from Poland into Ukraine. They've not been able to do either one of those. So I think that if we could really get better at tightening up or using all the economic tools, stopping, for example, Russia's export of oil to China and India using the so-called shadow fleet, these vessels that sail out through the Baltic Sea and Black Sea, if you cut that off, then Russia would not have the money necessary to buy what it gets from China, Iran, and North Korea. So without us even really trying, without even having declared we want Ukraine to win. And even after 8 months of not delivering anything, Russia has not been able to exploit any local tactical successes. So this is part of the reason I remain optimistic until the time that we do get serious about helping Ukraine win.
Well, your story about painting up old 60-year-old tanks just reminds me of the phrase I use all the time, which is you could put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And that's what I think about when you tell a story like that. Maybe the last thing we could get into here, I many other questions that we can ask at another time, but I want to get your reaction to a story I read recently that was reported in various news sources, not just from Russia. And it said that approximately 1/3 of Russian citizens at this time support using a nuclear weapon against Ukraine. Your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, I don't trust any poll that comes out of Russia, number one. Number two, I doubt that people would really understand if they were asked, okay, you support using a nuclear weapon, even if it means that the United States will launch a counterstrike and destroy XYZ. Okay, I think they probably won't be so bold. I mean, for me, public opinion in Russia does not affect how the Kremlin operates anyhow. I mean, they're having to use everything they can just to find soldiers to send to die in Ukraine. Over 1 million Russians have left the country to avoid getting conscripted and getting sent in there. And also because, talented young people know that there is no future for them inside a Putin-led or Putin-led Russia. So, when I think about this nuclear question, which really is important because, as I said earlier, I believe that that's what's kept the United States and Germany from acting decisively to help Ukraine win. So you have to ask the question, would they really use a tactical nuclear weapon? We're not talking about Hiroshima or Dr. Strangelove strategic nukes. We're talking about tactical nuke. Would they really do that? And I think the answer is no, because there's no benefit for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. It won't be a moral decision for them because they clearly have thousands of them and they don't care how many people get killed, including their own. But there's no benefit on the battlefield. In fact, because President Biden has said there would be catastrophic consequences for Russia if they used it. China and India have said, do not do this. Again, not a moral thing for them, but they don't want any disruption of the cheap oil and gas they're getting from Russia right now. And so you try to think, well, where would they use a nuke on the battlefield? Where would they do it? And the Ukrainians have not offered a big, giant, tempting target that could be destroyed by a tactical nuclear weapon that would make it worth it for Russia for all the consequences they would suffer. So really, for them, their nukes are only valuable if they don't use them because they see how we are deterred. Once they use it, then it's over. It's over for them. And so I think that we should, next time that they threaten to use a nuclear weapon, the response should be, thank you very much. We also have thousands of nuclear weapons. You will suffer catastrophic consequences if you even start deploying tactical nuclear weapons. And by the way, we're sending another 500,000 rounds of artillery ammunition to Ukraine. I mean, the United States, we are allowing ourselves to be blackmailed by Russia's threat of using a tactical nuclear weapon. And what a terrible signal that sends to Iran, North Korea, China, and any other country that is thinking about maybe they want to have a nuclear weapon, that the United States can be deterred by that.
As you've said many times, we are deterring ourselves. We're doing the job for Russia. Last question, Ben. Where do you see this going by the end of the year? If we were to sit down here on December 31st, what would be the status of the war?
I think the battlefield itself would not have changed very much. I think Ukraine is using this year to stabilize the front. And it's also a year of industrial competition. The Czechs just announced that they're increasing ammunition. They're sending Slovakians, they're sending ammunition. So you kind of feel like after a very slow start that the momentum is changing in terms of us delivering some basic things. You've got different companies that are setting up shop inside Ukraine, which was verboten 2 years ago. So those kind of things are happening. Now Ukraine has a big challenge. They've got to fix their recruiting and training system. They have plenty of people, military age women and men, inside Ukraine, as well as sitting in Poland and Germany and Romania, for example. It's the duty of the government to get the laws correct and to incentivize women and men to come step forward, join the service, and assure them and their families that they will not be sent into the meat grinder the way the Russians do it, but instead they would be properly trained, properly equipped, put into a unit that trains before it actually deploys the same way we do. That's the job of the government. They don't have a people problem. They have a shortage of trained soldiers and units. They need to fix that this year.
And on that note, we have to leave it. I know you've got to run, Ben. Listen, thank you again for joining me on the No Delusion Zone, and let's do this again soon.
I look forward to it, Dave.
Thank you for watching this edition of the No Delusion Zone. And remember, anyone can have their own delusions, but they can't have their own facts. Take care, stay safe, and stay sane.